All right, we should be back, and with that, I'll hand it over to Denise Harlow.
Thank you, Cashin. Good afternoon and good morning, folks. I know we have folks calling in from around the country. Denise Harlow, the Project Director for the National Training Center here at the Community Action Partnership, and we are thrilled to bring you today's webinar. Today's webinar on organizational sustainability is part of a webinar series we've done with an OCS CSBG Training and Technical Assistance Grant that funds the National Training Center. So this webinar is free. It is being recorded, as Cashin mentioned, and will be posted on the CSBG TNTA Resource Center site tomorrow, where folks can search for it, download it, and play it at their leisure, at their desk, or at a board retreat, or at a staff retreat, if there's another way that you want to use that particular recording. So I just want to, again, say thank you to OCS for the resources to provide today's training. And today's training actually builds off of a toolkit, actually 3 toolkits, that we've been developing with Transition Guides. And we'll introduce our speakers here in a moment, but they do come from the national firm Transition Guides. If folks have not checked out their website, I would encourage you to do so at transitionguides.com. A ton of great information and great resources on organizational sustainability, leadership transition, leadership succession. They've been doing this work a long time, and we're thrilled to have Transition Guides work with us to develop toolkits and webinars specific to community action. So before we get started up today with our introductions, I'm going to turn it back over to Cashin, who's going to walk us through the technical side of the webinar.
All right, everyone. Again, I am Cashin Yu, and if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, you are welcome to find me in the chat feature. You can also email me at cyiu@communityactionpartnerships.com. I'll put that up in the chat window in a moment in case you need a visual on that. If you lose your internet connection, you can still call into the conference using the telephone number in your confirmation email along with the access code. There will be a poll that appears on the right side panel. We appreciate your participation in this, and we will try to make an announcement when that does go up. If you lose track of any of your features, you can use the tabs across the top right side to get them again. You can submit questions at any point in time to the Q&A box on that right side panel. We have about an hour and 15 minutes today to allow for questions and feedback. We will be taking most of the questions at the end, but we will be sending them along as we go, so do try to send them in when they come up to you. Please do send questions to all panelists so that we can make sure that they are all seen and addressed. As mentioned, this is being recorded, and it will be up on the resource bank. The guides will be coming out very soon, so be on the lookout for those, and a PDF of the slides will be available on the resource bank tomorrow as well. So, Denise, if we could introduce our speakers today.
Great, thank you, Cashin. And as Cashin mentioned, you can find these resources at csbgtta.org is the address for the bank, the resource bank, again, csbgtta.org, and they'll also be up on the partnerships website as well, communityactionpartnership.com. The 2 trainers today, Don Teevee and Lisa Burford, are both well-experienced consultants with not-for-profits. In addition, Don has worked for the Illinois Community Action Association, has extensive experience working directly with community action agencies. Lisa actually was at our convention in August in New York City and did a presentation on executive succession as well, beginning to introduce some of the toolkits that we have rolling out over the next week or 2. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Lisa and Don to get us started off today. Thanks so much, folks.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or whatever time zone you may be in. My name is Lisa Burford, and I'm glad to be here today presenting this webinar on organizational sustainability. We also have Don Teevee on the line, who will introduce himself when he gets into his portion of the presentation. In terms of us, as you see, we're with Transition Guides, and you see our pictures in our background here and a little about Transition Guides. Transition Guides is a national thought leader and provider of nonprofit CEO search and transition, succession, and sustainability services. We're located in Silver Spring, but we do work in the D.C. area, in Denver, New York, and in California, in the San Francisco area. As was mentioned, we have years of working with organizations, helping them through transitions and working with founders and longtime executives. We would like to start this presentation by sharing a little about ourselves, as I said, and giving you the context for the work that we're doing. I'll turn it over now to Don to allow him to introduce himself.
Well, thanks, Lisa. This is Don Tebbe, and I'm so delighted to have this opportunity to join you today and reconnect with Community Action. We've worked with, as Denise mentioned earlier, that I've worked for the Illinois Community Action Association in an earlier career, and we have worked pretty extensively with community action agencies throughout our work, our 20 years of working on Chief Executive Transitions and Succession. So delighted to have the opportunity to join you today. Cashin, I think you were going to do a poll, and let's see who we have on the call so we can kind of help create a little bit more context for our remarks today.
Sure, that is currently open.
So if you're an executive director, a board member, other staff, or other, if you could just click on the appropriate response, that'll help us get some additional context so we can focus our remarks. Back to you, Cashin. Let's see if there's folks that need a little bit more time.
Yeah, we'll just give people a few more seconds to get those last few answers in, and then we will close poll and let you know.
Well, folks are responding. How about if I just give a little bit of preview about the topics that we're going to be discussing today. We have there we go. So we have there's 3 webinars coming up. We have obviously the one today on organizational sustainability, assessing and acting for the future. We have another one coming up that is about leadership succession, and it's leadership succession planning, and it's going to focus on the 3 types of succession planning. Again, all of these are geared to guides that the Community Action Partnership is about to publish. And the third and final one is going to be on October 24th, and that's going to be on executive transition management. So they build off of each other. The organizational sustainability, today's webinar, and the guide, that related guide, is going to give you kind of the platform around organizational sustainability from which the discussion around leadership succession can spring, or executive transition management. Executive transition, leadership succession is going to walk you through, as I said, the 3 types of succession plans and how to strengthen your organization ahead of an executive transition. And then the final one is going to be focused squarely on executive transition management, managing the turnover of the chief executive or senior executive in your agency, how to prepare for that, how to execute the search and selection process, and importantly, how to follow through afterwards and really, capture the gains that you make during the selection process and make sure that your successor or the new executive that you hire gets off to a very fast and brilliant start. And all the webinars are 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. 2 p.m. to 3:15 p.m. Eastern Time. Cashin, back to you.
Yes, the results should be up on your screen so that you can tell a little bit about our audience.
Well, great. Looks like we're about a third and a third executive directors or chief executives, about a third other senior staff members, and about a third other, and no board members today. So, okay, great. Well, so great. That's very helpful. That helps us certainly frame our remarks. And so I'm going to pass the baton back over to Lisa.
Thank you, Don. Today's agenda will be two-part. We'll start with an overview of organizational sustainability, the definition as we will use it for stability, sustainability, and vitality. We'll talk about the 4 elements of organizational sustainability, the sustainability planning process. We'll compare and contrast other sustainability models, and then we'll take questions. The second part will be led by Don, and we'll talk about using the Community Action Partnership Sustainability Planning Guide. And I want to say, as we're speaking, because we have the ability to do so, I'd love for you to just type in your questions and we'll take them along the way. We will have time at the end for all general questions, but if something comes up while I'm speaking, please feel free to chime in. I want to make sure I'm addressing your needs. So we start off talking about sustainability. So what is sustainability and how is it different than stability or vitality? For us, the definition is clear. If you look at this chart and looking at the vitality, sustainability, and stability, if you start at the bottom, stability is the basic level of health. It's, are you doing okay? Do you have enough resources to carry out the short to midterm activities? This is where you start. You start your organization wanting to be stable. There's another level of above that when we talk about sustainability. And sustainability is when you have the fundamentals in place that enable the organization to be a high-value asset over a long term. And this is really what you need before you move to the vitality stage. And vitality is when you have the exuberant strength and vigor and the capacity to live and grow and develop. Very powerful organization, engaged, aligned, and energized. And we make the distinction in these 3 levels because sometimes you have an organization that has a charismatic leader and you think that they've achieved this vitality, but really when you look deeper at the organization, you see that they may be missing some of the key elements of sustainability. And that's what we really want to talk about today is what are those key elements to keep the organization strong and make sure that the fundamentals are in place. When we talk about organizational sustainability, we talk about it through these lenses. These 4 lenses are how we assess an organization's sustainability. So we're looking at the business model and strategy, the resources, the leadership, and the culture. And let me explain what each of those means for our purposes. So when we talk about strategy and business model, we're really talking about how do you do business. When we say business model, how do you make money doing what you do? How do you carry out your mission? How do you deliver value for the mission and purpose that you have? Does the organization have a life in front of it? And we typically say 5 to 7 years of life. Is it built on a quality service that is needed by the clients and valued by the donors? This is how we examine the business model. Then when we talk about business strategy, we're talking about your competitive advantage. What are the actions that you do that create and sustain your market position? How do you carry out this mission different than others who may have a similar mission? So we ask the question, is there a strategy in place? Is it written? Is there a strategic plan? Has it been developed? Has it expired? Where are you with that? We also ask about position in the organization. And that question, in terms of does it position the organization to meet the future needs and demands? So what you're doing, is it going to run out in a couple of years based on current trends or funding or laws or anything like that? How is the organization positioned for the future? And then the other question is about the board and staff. Are they aligned with this strategy and business model? Do they understand it and what their role is in this business model and strategy? So that's the first core element of sustainability, strategy and business model. The next element is leadership. And when we talk about leadership, we're talking about having the leadership in place to meet the current and future needs. And by leadership, we mean both board and staff. We want to know if there are succession plans in place for top leaders. Is there a plan for the inevitable, which is when that person moves on? Who's going to do these tasks? What are these tasks? How are they going to get done? Another thing that we look at under leadership is the board, and certainly if in assessing the board, we want to make sure that your board is a high-value asset to the organization. We want to make sure that the board's work covers the 3 core roles for a nonprofit board. So what a nonprofit board should be focusing on. And those 3 core roles are shaping the mission and direction of the organization, ensuring that the leadership and resources are there for the organization to continue and do its mission-driven work, and then monitoring and improving the performance of the organization, the executive, and itself. And then also in this leadership element, we're looking at ensuring that there's a strong and positive relationship between the board and the chief executive. So we examine all of these areas when we talk about leadership sustainability. The other element of sustainability is resources. What are the trends and outlook in the future for the organization? Do you have the sufficient financial resources to meet the short and midterm commitments? And by short and midterm, we mean 6 to 24 months. We take a look at the financial resources. We take a look at the income and the income streams to see where the organization will be in the future. We ask questions about revenue streams to make sure they're properly diverse and have longevity. We look at the favorable trends and ratios and sufficient capital to make sure that the organization can continue to operate and pay its expenses. Resources also looks at some of what we call the hard and the soft assets of the organization, the hard being the financial side, and then the soft being sort of the reputational capital and how people view the organization. What are the feelings, or what are how's the organization positioned in its community or industry? Resource sustainability also looks at proactive resource development strategy. Is there a strategy that proactively looks at where the resources are coming into the organization, how they're coming into the organization, and who's responsible for it? So this resource development strategy, we believe, must be in place in order to be a sustainable organization. And then lastly, that there is a sound link between the business model, and that's what you're doing, the strategy, how you're doing it, and the resource plan, which outlines where these resources are coming from and who would be responsible for attaining those resources. So these are the what's very important for resource sustainability. And then the last one is culture. When we talk about culture, we're talking about resiliency of the organization. How quickly does it bounce back from setbacks? Within organizations, certainly there are setbacks. A resilient culture is one that can bounce back when you have some kind of situation that sets the organization back for whatever reason. We also look at whether the organization's culture is future-focused, results-oriented, and action-based. And looking at the value of the organization, making sure the value and worth is widely understood throughout all the stakeholders, and that's the board, the staff, and the volunteers. And is it a culture in which virtually anyone on the team could make a compelling case for support? So the culture of the organization embodies all of these things, but again, an assessment of this tells us whether the organization is truly sustainable. These are the 4 key elements of sustainability as defined by transition guides and outlined in the guide that you will see in the guide that we're sharing with the Community Action Partnership. I will now turn it over to Don Tebbe to talk about the to talk about the guide. Don?
Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa. Appreciate it a great deal. So as we talked about here in the, Lisa, could you turn the baton over to me? Great. I think I got it now. All right, just to make sure I can advance the slides here. So I realize that some of this discussion about the 4 core elements of sustainability is kind of theoretical. Yes, sounds like, of course, business model, business strategy, so on and so forth. What we want to do with the guide is take this down to out of the theoretical and down to a very practical level. I mentioned earlier that there are 3 guides in the sustainability toolkit. This guide that we're talking about today, truly on organizational sustainability, and the one on succession planning and executive transition management for those that joined the call after we had that discussion. So in the sustainability planning guide, to kind of take it from the theoretical to the practical, there really are several sections to the guide. It has an introduction to organizational sustainability, reviewing some of the key points that Lisa just talked about. And then there's a really a wonderful little tool that we call a sustainability mini assessment, a simple 1-page tool that allows you to take a look at your organization. And it's a great thing to do with a team of board members and staff members, or with your senior management team. It's not meant to be a management audit. Obviously can't do that in 1 page, but it's a great place to get things started and start bringing some focus to organizational sustainability planning. So again, 2 sections to the guide, introduction, and then this 9-step process for sustainability action planning, and then it's got the mini assessment. The other thing that we included in the guide is that as we were writing the guides, we found that it's very easy to talk about succession planning in a step-by-step process, because there's a certain number of steps to it, and it leads to a product. Now, in the sustainability planning, it leads to a product too. It's a sustainability action plan, but there's a lot of different variables that you could address in that action plan, depending on what your key sustainability issue is. And that's one of the things that we find, that the assessment allows you to take a look at those 4 areas that Lisa talked about in depth, and to take a look at and see which one of those areas is your organization's key sustainability issue. We know that there's a lot going on right now in community action. We're looking at sequestration. We're looking at the challenges around weatherization. The fact that it looks very probable that weatherization will certainly not be funded at the levels that you saw during the stimulus, and may even be funded at a very much reduced level over historic highs before the stimulus. And challenges with CSBG, when we were talking with the folks at the partnership, it was like old home week. I was remembering conversations that we had in the 1980s, early 1990s around CSBG funding. So it's always going to be some controversy around any kind of federal funding. There's always going to be some challenges around it. The sustainability toolkit is really meant to be able to help you take a step back and take a look how you can develop more sustainable future for your agency. The reality is that some of these issues, particularly with CSBG funding, since it's so central to the identity and the lifeblood of community action agencies, that you may actually be in kind of a stability planning mode until things sort themselves out. Personally, I believe that community action has such a strong historic track record that I think they'd have a hard time doing away with CSBG funding, but we are living in interesting times, and so I think we can hopefully maybe look at it from the standpoint that we don't necessarily have to do stability planning, that we can really focus on sustainability, and that's really the thrust of this toolkit. So let's talk a little bit about the steps, the 9 steps to a more sustainable future. After you've done, you are part of the mini assessment process. Preceding that is you might want to consider organizing a small task force. As we've done sustainability planning projects, what we found is it's a great place to have a cross-functional team. Maybe a couple staff members, a couple board members, and the chief executive. And this is really a role where I think, for those of you that are executive directors and chief executives, this is something that you really want to take on a very personal level, that there's no getting around, that organizational sustainability really begins at your doorstep, begins at your desk. And so this is something that I think that you would want to organize yourself. And after you have your task force together, is orienting the task force is to get a project plan together and make the assignments. What we find is that 4 or 5 people is a good cross-functional team, and it's really, there's not a lot of heavy lifting in this kind of planning. It's basically one person kind of taking the point for some of the planning, development of the plans and so forth, but it really is much more doing the assessment work, having some conversations to figure out the planning issues, and then beginning to tackle them. So as you talk with people that you board members that you might bring onto this task force, usually 3, 4, 5 meetings is sufficient time really to delve into this and delve into it fairly thoroughly. So after you've got your task force together, and the guide will lay this out for you in much more detail than I'm covering it here. So after you've got your task force together, the next thing to do is to gather and update the supporting documents. You'll want to have a copy of your strategic plan at hand. You might want to have a copy of your organization chart, things like that. There's a number of documents that we laid out in the guide that you might want to have at your fingertips as you do this. And then the 4th step, really, this is the centerpiece. This is conducting that that stability mini assessment that I mentioned earlier. And again, it's a matter of not necessarily trying to canvass the entire world or maybe canvass the entire organization, but maybe conducting it with your board members, conducting it with members of your senior management team, and then reviewing the results with the task force. Where are the places that you have some agreement? Where are the places that you diverge? And what are those agreements and divergences about? What can that tell you about your sustainability issue? And that 5th step, really the result of that is that you want to define what is your organization's key sustainability issue. Is it a matter of that you've kind of outlived your business model and you need to rework your business model and to have a stronger life in front of it? And as Lisa mentioned earlier, that business model is the kind of logic model for how you produce value in the world and how you get funded to produce that value. Or is it a leadership issue? Are you, I suspect that many of you may be, particularly executive directors, may be boomers that are thinking about retirement in the next few years. And, there really is going to be kind of a transfer of leadership that's going to need to take place in the future, and that may be your key sustainability issue. Or it might be something else. It might be something having to do with resources. We all know that there's lots of questions about that right now. So whatever your key sustainability issue or issues might be, locking in on what those are, and then you may want to drill down on those issues a little bit more before you do your action plan. And the guide lays out some other resources, so it's not just Transition Guides thinking or our way of doing things, but there's some other resources that you can look at. There's been some wonderful new books come out on business models, nonprofit business models, for example, things like that, and we talk about those in the guide. But you may want to drill down a little bit more, get a little bit more information about your sustainability issue. And then finally, or not finally, but your next step is really to develop the action plan and secure commitments. And those two things are vitally important. It's not just about making the plan, but it's securing the commitments around what is it that you need to actually fulfill on that plan. For example, you know, if you're, what is it that you need from the board? Are there places where you need the board to step up in order to fulfill on this action plan? So basically, just making sure that you get the plan laid out and that you're getting the appropriate commitments that you need. You know, might be a situation where you're facing planning a leadership succession. Well, that's going to take some time. You know, there may be some, you know, obviously some commitments that you need from the board to be able to put that succession plan in place, so forth. What are those things? And again, the guide lays this out in a lot more detail than we're touching on here. And then obviously implementation of your plan, and an important part of it is reviewing and readjusting along the way. That's getting some feedback in there about how your plan is unfolding, and doing some adjustments along the way to make sure that you know, the plan remains on target, because sometimes these things get a little slippery. You know, you may get into this, and you know, as you may have experienced in other kinds of planning, you get into it and you think it is one thing, and then you start digging at it and you start, you know, implementing your action plan, you realize that may be something else. An example would be one organization we worked with where they came into the planning process thinking that there was an issue with one of, they had two boards, and they came into the planning process thinking there was an issue with one of their boards. And as they started doing the planning work and started strengthening the board capacity, they also realized that they were a little weak on the staff leadership side in that particular area. That happened to be resource development, and they decided to make some personnel adjustments related to that. So, you know, the feedback loop is vitally important, that ability to readjust the plan. As Kasia mentioned earlier, if you have questions along the way, feel free to pop them over there into the Q&A box. We're happy to take them. So that's the 9 steps of sustainability planning: getting your team together, getting your team oriented, and planning out the project, and mapping out your timetable. Usually it takes about, you know, a sustainability planning project is not something that needs to drag on like strategic planning. It actually can be something that you know, you can do in a matter of a couple, 3 months. You can actually do it in the space. I've seen organizations do this in the space of 30 days. So it's not something that, you know, is like strategic planning where it's like, oh my God, we're signing up for this long, drawn-out process. Gathering up your supporting documents, and then doing the assessment and really digging into that assessment. What does that assessment mean? Having some really good, robust conversations with your team, and then maybe drilling down on the issues you might need to gather a little bit more information, putting your plan together, and then implementing. So before we get into the discussion and questions, let me just share with you some resources that we've also included in the PowerPoint and included in the guide. There's, as Leach mentioned earlier, there's different views on sustainability. The California Wellness Foundation has a publication that is a very good publication on sustainability. For those of you that are more concerned about program sustainability, this piece here from the Civic Partnerships, their toolkit is primarily sustainability, is primarily programmatically focused. And for those of you that are much more concerned about the financial piece of sustainability, these 3 pieces here, the nonprofit sustainability, making strategic decisions for financial viability, a brand new book by Jeannie Bell at Compass Point, really an excellent resource for digging into particularly the strength of your business model. And they've got a wonderful matrix in there that helps you really sort out the strength of your business model. This piece here from the Nonprofit Finance Project is a very, it's a wonderful tool. It actually is a box of about 9 guides and really takes you through in a very exhausting, thorough, I shouldn't say exhausting, but thorough process of looking at sustainability, and really is a wonderful planning tool in and of itself. This piece here by David LaPiana is a brand new book around nonprofit business plans, and has a slightly different take on it than the Jeannie Bell's and Jan Masioka's piece. David's background is much more around strategic planning and comes at it from that point of view. Bell and Masioka really tackle it much more from a nonprofit business model point of view. And then there's also the piece here from the sustainability formula by the TCC group. Not a lot of depth there. These resources are much more in depth, but it is another framing on organizational sustainability that is probably important to highlight. Coming up, we have a couple of opportunities for our Next Steps workshop, which is a program, a 2-day program that we've been offering for about 10 years for founders and long-term executives that really walks you through these 3 tools in depth and gives you an opportunity really to work with peers to look at organizational sustainability, succession, and transition planning. We have a free e-newsletter that you can sign up for, and then finally there's some, as Cashin said, there's some great resources on our website, completely free, including this publication series by the Annie Casey Foundation, which we crafted for them earlier. It really walks you through a lot of these ideas in much more detail, particularly around the executive transition and executive succession. And then finally, a couple books that Transition Guides team has published. So let's go back and see what questions do you have. I realize that succession planning or sustainability planning is a little bit more theoretical. The next 2 webinars will get into a lot more real nuts and bolts of succession planning and nuts and bolts of how you manage a really great executive transition.
All right. Well, I haven't seen any questions that are coming in, but we will give you a few minutes to try to get those in. And it looks like Lisa has just posed through the chat window about whether you guys have any questions about their core elements of sustainability. So while people are typing in, I just wanted to give the reminder that this is being recorded, and the recording will be available on the CSBG TNTA Resource Center more than likely tomorrow, along with a PDF of the slides. He mentioned that this was part of a series, and that is true. We are going to have 3 guides. It's kind of a toolkit in 3 parts, or in 3 acts as we kind of think about it. And there will, of course, be 3 separate webinars, the other 2 coming up in October. Give people a few more moments. But in the meantime, was there any summary information that you would like to impart your wisdom with everyone on?
I had something I'd like to add. Don mentioned the sustainability mini assessment, and I want to say that that's a great tool for people who are looking at how they can assess the organization, because this question about sustainability is not just from one person's perspective. You're really looking at gaining insight from others about how you're doing in these core elements. So it's a great tool that can be used with the staff to ask how they see the organization's business model and resources and leadership and culture, as well as asking these questions of the board to see, and one way to use that tool is to see if the board and the staff are aligned with their perception of the organization's strengths and weaknesses around these areas, so that mini assessment can open the door to a conversation about this sustainability work. So it's not just the executive's opinion of the strength or the sustainability of the organization. It's an opportunity to open up that dialogue and have that conversation with the board and the staff.
You know, Lisa, this is Don. This is a really important point. I think one of the points I guess I would like to make is that these are not, I mentioned, I sort of made light of that, this is kind of the theoretical part of the the framework's kind of theoretical, and it is, but it really is grounded in research and in practice. We've been using the sustainability mini assessment over the past 3 years with dozens of groups, and we also use it as part of the Next Steps workshop, and people really do find it to be a very deceivingly powerful tool. That's, how can you have just one page of questions that really, yield these wonderful insights about the organization? And I think that's because the toolkit and the framework really is based on a great deal of practice background and research. As we developed the sustainability model, we looked around and looked at these various models, the ones that I mentioned earlier in the resource discussion. We also did a pretty extensive literature review, and in our team, we have a team of about 17 people that have been working together. Various of us have been working together for about a decade, doing succession planning and sustainability planning and leadership transitions in nonprofits. And as we looked at it, the thing that really struck us is that there really are these 4 areas that, whenever we run into issues around organizational leadership succession or transition, a lot of times they have to do with kind of the sustainability or the viability of the organization. And as we looked at it, it just jumped out at us that these 4 elements are the ones that really are kind of the cardinal points, or kind of the points on the sustainability compass that we need to pay attention to. And so we've been using the mini assessment and this framework for about 3 years now, and really seeing very powerful results. It allows organizations like, for example, organizations that are facing a chief executive transition at some point in the future to really kind of ground their transition process or do some early planning that allows them to strengthen the organization ahead of transition, particularly transitions involving long-term executives or even founding executives. Those are very challenging transitions. This is an opportunity, or the sustainability mini assessment followed by the sustainability planning is a great way to really begin that conversation and say, how can we strengthen the organization ahead of this important transition coming up? What are some of the areas that we need to pay attention to and focus on?
All right, thank you. If you have any additional questions, sometimes it takes a few minutes with the material to let them sink in. You are welcome to go ahead and email them to me, Cashion, CYIU, @communityactionpartnership.com, as well as anybody here at the center, Denise Harlow or Angie Cruz as well. And you can put them on the forum of the TNTA Resource Center, and we'll get those sent out to the correct people as they go and get everything answered. There will be an evaluation that pops up at the end of this webinar. We do appreciate you taking a few minutes to both reflect on this webinar specifically and to give us your ideas for upcoming trainings that you would like to see. So with that, I think we are ready to sign off for the day, unless there's anything else that Don or Lisa would like to say in closing.
Well, I just would like to make a pitch for the 2 upcoming webinars in this series, the Leadership Succession Planning. For those of you that may join the call late, we're going to focus on another guide in the toolkit, and this is on leadership succession and really how to how to strengthen our organization ahead. We'll look at 3 different types of succession planning. We'll look at succession essentials, which is the kind of succession plan that every organization should have in place, an emergency backup plan for the chief executive at least, and a board-adopted succession policy. We'll also look at departure-defined succession planning. When you know you're going to be leaving a position, particularly for those of you that may be planning a retirement, you know that date is coming up in the next couple of years. How do you strengthen your organization ahead of that? We'll also look at leader development planning, the kind of succession planning work that you can do to strengthen your team. So it'll be a great discussion around those 3 elements, and again, all that is captured in the guide that's coming out. And the third or final webinar in this series is about executive transition management. And we'll walk you through step by step from the early stages of planning an executive transition through the search and selection process, right on through the onboarding process, and what we call post-hire, the kind of work that you can do really to make sure that the new executive gets off to a fast and high impact start by doing some simple things during that post-hire period. So lots of good information coming up in these next 2 webinars, and we'd love to have you join us.
All right, thank you. Well, with that, I think we'll go ahead and close up for the day. Again, you can send questions after the webinar to us as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.